From our previous two videos, we learned exactly where every planet is domicile, exalted, and fallen. But this has left us with the question of what's going on in the whole rest of the zodiac. How do we interpret a planet when it's not in one of its domicile, exaltation, or fall signs? The answer to that question has everything to do with friends and foes amongst the planets. When a planet is not domicile, exalted, or fallen, we need to know how it feels about its host. So the question becomes, what's the relationship between the guest and the host? For example, if Mars is in Leo, then Mars is the guest, and the owner of Leo, the sun, is the host. And the dignity that Mars will have in Leo depends entirely on how it feels about the sun, its host. So now we need some kind of rule to figure out how planets feel about each other. What is the friendship and foeship amongst planets? Now that we know where all the domiciles are, it's very simple to figure out this friendship and enmity rule. The simple thing is that trines like trines, or planets that are trine to each other by their domiciles like each other. So draw a trine from any sign. For example, draw a trine from Leo. You'll wind up with Sagittarius and Aries as the other points of the trine. The owners of those two signs, Jupiter and Mars, are the friends of the sun. In other words, those three planets are friends with each other, the sun, Jupiter, and Mars. Try to draw a trine from another sign of Jupiter or Mars to see what happens. Like draw a trine from Cancer to Scorpio to Pisces. And you'll find out, Jupiter and Mars and the moon are friends. So we come up with this group of planets that are friends with each other. The sun, Mars, Jupiter, and the moon. Now draw a trine from any other sign that's not owned by one of these four planets. For example, draw one from Libra. The other points of a trine from Libra will point to Aquarius and Gemini, which are owned by Saturn and Mercury. So that means these three planets, Venus, the owner of Libra, Saturn, the owner of Aquarius, and Mercury, the owner of Gemini, are friends with each other. So these two groups have friendships within them and enmity between them. If trines seem somehow confusing to you, there's an easy way to deal with that too, because all the elements in the zodiac are laid out by trines. So you could just rephrase the same rule that elements like elements. So whatever element a planet's domicile is, it likes the planets that have the same element in their domicile. If you apply that rule, you'll come up with exactly the same conclusion. So this gives us two kind of camps or parties amongst planets. And one is very right-wing because it contains the leaders and the lawmakers, Mars, Jupiter, the sun. And the other is like a left-wing party because it contains Saturns like the proletariat, the workers, and Venus and Mercury. They're very individualistic and like freedom and liberty. Now we know what groups of planets like each other and which planets don't like each other. Let's figure out how that affects these question marks in the zodiac, the signs that we don't know about. So for Mars, for example, we have 8 question marks on 8 different signs. What is Mars's dignity in these signs? Well, Mars is friends with the sun, so it's going to be happy. Its dignity is going to be positive or happy if it's in Leo, the sun's sign. Mars is friendly with Jupiter, so it'll be happy in either Sagittarius or Pisces. Now, Mars is an enemy with Saturn, so it's going to have unhappy dignity. It's going to feel uncomfortable if it's in Saturn's sign, Aquarius. Same thing for the other enemies of Mars, Venus, and Mercury. So if it's in Taurus or Libra or Gemini or Virgo, Mars will feel uncomfortable. Now, those are the basic rules of friendship, but there are some tweaks to that base that are very interesting and very important and also fairly easy to understand. If you take a diagram of all the domiciles like this, and then you map the friendships and enemies to this diagram, you'll notice a very clear pattern. These are the signs that are owned by the left wing group, and these are the signs that are owned by the right wing group. The important thing about this pattern is that there are three contentious borders. There's three borders between a friend and an enemy. Almost all of the tweaking that goes on to the basic rules of friendship and foeship happens on those three borders. And almost always what happens is the relationship between the planets that own those borders become better than you would have expected. The idea being that these two people have to share some property. They have to learn how to coexist. So this is going to affect the relationship between Saturn and Jupiter, between Mars and Venus, and between the luminaries and Mercury. So now let's go planet by planet and take a look at how this actually affects things. So let's talk about Jupiter first. Jupiter's domiciles are Sagittarius and Pisces. It's exalted in Cancer and therefore fallen in the opposite sign, Capricorn. Here are Jupiter's friends and enemies and the resulting dignity that it gets in the signs owned by those friends and enemies. Now, because Jupiter shares a border with Saturn, its relationship to Saturn is better than we expected. So this is going to affect Jupiter's dignity in Saturn's sign Aquarius, not Capricorn. Capricorn is its debilitation sign, its fall sign. That's already set. Those rules, fall, exaltation, and domicile, take precedence over friendship and enemy. So Jupiter's improvement of its relationship with Saturn will only affect this one sign of how it feels in Aquarius. And what effect will it have? Instead of what we expected Jupiter to feel uncomfortable or unhappy in Aquarius. But it has learned how to deal with Saturn because it's Saturn's neighbor. So it has learned how to tolerate Saturn, and its dignity in Aquarius, therefore, is tolerant or neutral. So the complete picture of Jupiter's dignity in all 12 zodiac signs looks like this. Now let's have a look at Saturn's dignity. Saturn's domiciles are Capricorn and Aquarius. It's exalted in Libra and therefore debilitated in the opposite sign, Aries. Here are Saturn's friends and enemies and the dignities we therefore expect. Now again, Saturn shares a border with Jupiter, so its relationship to Jupiter improves. And that affects Saturn's dignity in Jupiter's signs, Sagittarius and Pisces. We expected Saturn to be uncomfortable in these signs, but because Jupiter is its neighbor, it's learned how to cope with Jupiter. And instead of feeling uncomfortable, it feels neutral or tolerant when it's in Sagittarius or Pisces. And so this is Saturn's chart of its dignity in all the 12 zodiac signs. How about Mars? Mars' domiciles are Aries and Scorpio. It's exalted in Capricorn and therefore fallen in the opposite sign, Cancer. Here's the friends and enemies of Mars and the rest of the dignities that we assume from that. Mars, however, shares a border with Venus. So its relationship to Venus is better than we thought. It's not great. It doesn't become great. It just becomes better. So this will affect Mars's dignity if it's in one of Venus's signs, Taurus or Libra. Instead of feeling uncomfortable and unhappy in those signs, it feels okay. It feels neutral. It feels tolerant. It doesn't feel great. It doesn't feel like it's in a friend's sign, but it also doesn't feel like it's bad or in an enemy sign. And so this is the complete description of Mars's dignity in each of the 12 zodiac signs. Now let's move on to Venus. Venus's domiciles are Taurus and Libra. It exalts in Pisces, therefore falls in the opposite sign, Virgo. Here are Venus's friends and enemies and the dignities that we expect from that. Again, Venus and Mars share a border, so this means that Venus's relationship to Mars is better than we thought. That affects how Venus feels if it's in one of Mars's signs, Aries or Scorpio. Instead of feeling uncomfortable and unhappy like we thought it would, it feels okay. It's tolerant. It's neutral there. Venus has one extra rule. Her relationship to Jupiter is also better than you would think by just mapping out the trines. As to why that is, there's two ways you can easily sort it out and remember it. One, Venus is very affectionate. It's the planet of love. So it extends its border principle further than most planets do. Two, Jupiter and Venus are very similar in that they're both intellectual. So what effect this has will be felt on Venus's dignity in Jupiter's signs, Sagittarius or Pisces, but Pisces is already accounted for as her exaltation sign. So it really only affects Jupiter's dignity in Sagittarius. Instead of being what we expected, uncomfortable, Venus would be okay in Sagittarius. She'll be neutral there. And so we have this as a complete map of Venus's dignities in all 12 zodiac signs. Now let's talk about the Sun's dignity in the 12 signs. The Sun's domicile is Leo. It exalts in Aries and therefore falls in the opposite sign, Libra. Here are the Sun's friends and enemies and the dignities that we expect from those. The Sun shares a border with Mercury, so its relationship to Mercury is better than we thought it would be. So this will affect how it feels if it's in one of Mercury's signs, Gemini or Virgo. Instead of feeling upset or uncomfortable in those signs, the Sun is okay in those signs. And so this is the complete picture of the Sun's dignity in all 12 zodiac signs. Now the Moon, which has a lot of tweaks to the base. The Moon is domicile in Cancer, exalted in Taurus, and fallen in the opposite sign, Scorpio. Here are the Moon's friends and enemies and the dignities that you would expect as a result of that. As with the Sun, the Moon shares a border with Mercury. So the Moon's relationship to Mercury is better than the basic expectation. So that will affect the Moon's dignity if it's in one of Mercury's signs, Gemini or Virgo. Instead of the Moon being uncomfortable in those signs, it's okay in those signs. But actually, for some reason, the Moon really improves its relationship with Mercury. And it's not just okay in Mercury's signs, it's happy in Mercury's signs. It has a much better relationship with Mercury than we would have expected. How do you make sense out of that, and how do you remember this exception? It's also pretty easy. The Moon is desire in the mind, the emotions. Mercury is the one who figures out how to achieve goals, is the intelligence. So the Moon really loves Mercury. Also, Mercury is the one who figures out how to express things, whereas the Moon is the one who feels things. So the Moon really loves Mercury because everybody tries to express what they're feeling. Now there's more rules about the Moon. There's two more rules. The Moon's relationship to her enemies is also better than it's supposed to be. The way to remember this is just that the Moon is mild. It's very mild, so it's not going to favor having strong partiality. So this affects the Moon's dignity in either Libra or Capricorn or Aquarius. We expected the Moon to be unhappy in those signs, but actually the Moon is okay in those signs. And the final rule about the Moon is the flip side of this. She doesn't just have a better relationship with her enemies, she also has a slightly worse relationship with her friends. So that affects the Moon's dignity in Sagittarius, Pisces, and Aries. Instead of being happy there like we would expect, the Moon is neutral there. So this is a complete picture of the Moon's dignity in all the 12 signs, and look at how simple it is. Look at how mild it is. Look at how middling it is. That is the Moon's nature. It's very pliable. It's very flexible. Finally, let's take a look at all of Mercury's dignities. Mercury's domiciles are Gemini and Virgo. Its exaltation is also in Virgo, which is interesting in and of itself, but we discussed before. Because its exaltation is in Virgo, its fall is in the opposite sign, Pisces. Mercury's friendships and enemies are these, and that reveals the other dignities that we expect from Mercury in the other signs. Mercury shares a border with the Sun, so its relationship to the Sun should be better than we expect, and indeed, it is. And that will affect Mercury's dignity in Leo. Instead of feeling uncomfortable in Leo, it's okay in Leo. But actually, it's much better. The relationship of Mercury to the Sun is much better than we expected. So it doesn't just feel okay in Leo, it feels happy in Leo. How do you make sense of that? It's also quite simple. The Sun is consciousness and Mercury is the intellect. The two are so intimate that almost nobody can tell them functionally apart. Now, how about Mercury's relationship to the Moon? It should improve too, right? Well, yeah, but it doesn't. It's as if Mercury gave the bonus that was supposed to go to the Moon, to the Sun instead, so the Sun got double bonus. Why? Why does Mercury have that negativity towards the Moon? It's also easy to understand because Mercury is the intellect, which tries to be objective, but Moon is emotions, which tries to be subjective. So Mercury has two other rules, a lot like the Moon's. Mercury's relationship to its enemies is better than we would have expected. So this will affect its dignity in Aries, Scorpio, or Sagittarius. Instead of feeling irritated or unhappy in those signs, it feels okay, it feels normal, it feels neutral. And also, similar to the way the Moon's relationship with its friends is worse than you expected, Mercury is almost like that. Its relationship to its friends is worse than we expected, except for Venus. So we can say that its relationship to Saturn is worse than we expected. So this affects Mercury's dignity in Saturn's signs, Capricorn or Aquarius. Instead of feeling happy in those signs as we expected, it feels neutral. Not unhappy, but neutral. So we have this picture of Mercury's dignity in any of the 12 zodiac signs. Now, what has happened to our basic concept of these two wings, left wing and right wing, these two camps or cliques of friendship among the planets, after we apply all these rules and exceptions to figure out the details of their relationships? What we see is that there is actually a spectrum from conservative to liberal, from right wing to left wing. At the furthest left is Saturn, and at the furthest right is the Sun. Those are the most inimical planets to each other. But the rest of the planets move inwards towards each other, and they become more forgiving towards each other. Venus is actually a mid-spectrum left-winger, and Jupiter and Mars are mid-spectrum right. And we find out that Mercury and the Moon actually wind up being very centrist. Great, we have sorted out all the dignities of all the planets in all 12 signs. I just want to mention one more thing so that you know everything about dignity and how to figure it out. There's one more important detail, and it's the conditionality of the situation. Friends and enemies might on Tuesday feel less friendly towards each other than they do on Wednesday, and on Thursday might feel more friendly. So similar things happen with the planets depending on their position relative to each other. We'll call these the conditional exceptions. The basic rule is this: if the two planets are too close or too far from each other, then the relationship between them gets a little bit worse. Whereas if they're the right distance from each other, if they're comfortably close to each other, the relationship between them gets a little bit better. The good distance to be from each other is between 2, 3, or 4 signs on either side. So if a planet, for example, is in Scorpio, then another planet that's either in Leo, Virgo, or Libra, or Sagittarius, Capricorn, or Aquarius will have a better relationship with this planet than it is supposed to. A little bit better, 1 grade better. Versus if the two planets are in any other configuration to each other, then it's a little bit worse. It might sound confusing, but it's actually not at all. It's real simple. So let's look at the Sun. These are the dignities that we assume for the Sun. Let's specifically look at the Sun in Scorpio. We assume that the Sun's dignity in Scorpio is happy. It's friends with Mars. But to really know the condition of Sun in Scorpio in this chart at this moment, we need to also know where Mars, the owner of Scorpio, is relative to the Sun, because its distance from the Sun will make a difference to their relationship. So let's say it's in Aquarius. That's comfortably close. It's within 2, 3, or 4 signs on either side of the Sun. So then the Sun's relationship with Mars improves. That means its dignity in Mars's sign Scorpio improves. How can you improve from friendship? You get double friendship. You get this concept of very good friend, best friend. It's almost as good of a dignity as being domicile. And then compare that to if Mars was somewhere else, like in Pisces. That's past the border of what is comfortably close. It's a little too far. So the inherent dignity of Sun in Scorpio, which was happiness, it demotes a little bit to neutrality. That's all. That's how simple it is. There's one more thing I want to say, though, regarding whether Mars would be in the same sign as the Sun. Technically, according to theory, it's supposed to make the relationship worse. They're too close. But actually, functionally, ignore that. The reason is that if Mars is in Scorpio, then you have a domicile planet there, which is a good dignity for Mars, which means that the Sun is now conjoined a planet that has good dignity, which is a fact that improves the Sun's dignity. This is what we're going to look at in the next episodes in this dignity series, this concept of recursive dignity or dignity affecting other dignity. But for now, the simple thing is actually you can rewrite this rule. Instead of saying if a planet is too close or too far, the relationship worsens, just say if it's too far. Because if it is right in the same side as a planet, then from one angle it makes the relationship a little bit less, and from another angle it makes the relationship a little bit better. So now you know everything. You're an expert about dignity. I mean, at least the theory of how to calculate the dignities. Watch the first episode in this playlist, this series, if you want to understand the interpretive implications of dignity. If you want to know my interpretation of dignity for you, for your chart, you can go to my website, victorcara.com, and go over to the readings section and look for the report called the Complete Chart Report. It's got a full description of all these concepts of dignity and what they mean interpretively to you, as well as tons and tons and tons of other important information and techniques. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode. So that means you should probably subscribe and get a notification. Thanks.